Hello everyone, Ramafool here, back with another 80th anniversary review, and today we'll be looking at the new 2025 Motorized James. This one is on the 3-pack, which includes a white tanker and James with some additional detail. Now, there has been a lot of criticism regarding the tender engines in this line, mostly for the fact that they are fatter and less proportionate as opposed to the smaller engines. And of course, I can't argue with that. Their design constraints do limit the amount of realism that can be incorporated into them. But before we dive deeper into that matter, let's go ahead and get James out of his box. Alright, so here he is, nothing too special about this pack, it's just a standard James model with an extra piece of rolling stock. So as always, we will start off with the engine, and yes, he is absolutely huge now. And I'm not just referring to the height, I'm talking about the overall proportions of this model. Like, his boiler is so large, it's almost as big as Gordon's. Now, I know it's like that so that it's wide enough to fit over his motor, but design-wise, this is kinda where tender engines fall short. I will say though, I think James is one of the better ones out of the 3 we've seen in this line so far. He may not be as TV accurate as the tank engines, but at least his front isn't squished. In fact, it is slightly long in the series, so this does technically bear some resemblance to that. He's also a little taller than the small engines, which I do like. But yeah, looking at him next to Thomas, you can see how hard it is to achieve that same amount of TV accuracy in him without exceeding height restrictions. Obviously, tank engines are easier to tackle in this case since they're smaller, but when it comes to big ones, that's a whole different matter. I think James's face looks nice though. It's a little different from the previous versions we've seen, as this one has a closed mouth and slightly raised left eyebrow, but honestly, I kinda dig it. It's definitely better than Gordon's, at least in my opinion. And I love that they painted the buffers and running board on this version. James does not have this feature on his standard model, so that's one reason why I chose this one over the other. However, the paint on the running board doesn't line up with his splashers, it kinda trails off before it even reaches them. I mean, it's one thing not to have it continue down to the back, but to leave this section bare, it just looks like an unfinished paint job. I won't stress over it too much, but I really don't see how hard it could have been to fill in the rest of these gaps here. But it is what it is. Anyway, you may have also noticed that James has a molded set of bogey wheels under his running board. That's a pretty neat upgrade. This piece is separate from the rest of his mold, as you can tell by the screw that's holding it in place. Though I can see this being easily mistaken for the screw that holds the body shell to the motor. For most engines dating 2014 and up, these screws have always been located at the very top. So just be careful when trying to insert or remove batteries from him not to unscrew this one, cause that'll only disconnect the bogey wheels. The one below it gives you access to the battery compartment. This, I think, might throw a lot of people off, and that's the only main drawback of this piece. But other than that, I think it's a nice addition. And just like the rest of the engines, he has his rivets and handrails printed on each side of him. And honestly, I think they look better on the toys rather than their TV counterparts. Do I still think they were necessary to add on though? Not really, but I really don't care too much about them anymore at this point. I mean, I've kinda gotten used to them by now. His dome, I believe, has more of a matte finish to it cause it looks duller than it was on his previous models. Not as important to discuss, but I thought it might be interesting to point out. What I really like is that the opening of his cab is hollow instead of being printed on like it was in the Revolution line. This looks so much more realistic now. Actually, the whole cab itself is hollow. They've just added this extra black piece inside so that the motor doesn't show, and I'm pretty sure it's also part of the mold to his roof. Now, in addition to being a bit taller, the bodies of the tender engines are also slightly longer. Plus, their couplings aren't like fitted to their motors anymore, instead they've attached them to another separately molded piece back here. And this typically acts as the rear bogey wheels for Gordon and Flying Scotsman, but since James doesn't gain any, I guess it's meant to represent part of his undercarriage. The problem is, with these longer couplings, it adds more distance between the engine and tender. Like, when you hook them up together, the gap between them is so wide, it makes the tender look like a cargo car. Speaking of which, let's take a closer look at that. So here's James's tender, which is the exact same mold as Gordon's. And it now has a removable coal piece similar to the 2021 talking version, only this too is hollow instead of being solid like it was before. Plus, it has an open section at the front, which could come in handy if you wanted to put little figures in there, like the new Bachmann figurines. Then we have these holes at the top for accessing the coal, but to me, they just make the tender look cheap. The front one is less noticeable from the side since it's blocked off by this section here, but you can still see the rear one from behind. And that's probably my only real complaint about this new tender. Then again, it's modern toy manufacturing, so what can you expect nowadays? Though from the sides, it still looks pretty decent. And here are some comparisons with previous James models. I still think the original Tomy version is the best design out of all of them. It's thinner and not as bulky like the Trackmaster 2 ones. But I will admit the new tenders are easier to manage since they can actually be detached from the engine. The Tomy ones were never able to do that. Now, I don't have a standard version of his Revolution model, but I do own the talking version from 2021, so I will use that as a substitute for it. And honestly, I don't know if either one of these is better than the other. It really depends on whichever scale you'd typically prefer. Though I think most people today would go for the shorter versions since the majority of this range has been in that size so far. The tenders should be around the same length as the other short rolling stock. I know the talking one is. But I do believe the newer ones are taller than the old versions since they have that removable coal piece. And you can see they're basically reusing this concept from the talking engines. Finally, let's look at the included tanker in this pack. And again, not as visually appealing as most of the other rolling stock, it's just a plain white tanker. Probably would have been more interesting if they slapped a face on it and made it another troublesome one. It does use a new mold though, so as to be in scale with the newer engines. And in addition to that, they've also added these ropes or wires, not really sure what they're supposed to be. I also don't know if this is meant to be another milk tanker, given that it's white, but we did have a really low quality image of the prototype of this pack, and in it, it had some sort of decal on its side. It might have been a milk carton, though I can't say for sure since it's so blurry. But whatever it was, they removed it from the final model. So I guess it can be whatever you want it to be, that's probably why they took it off. And when coupled up to James's tender, again, you can see the inconsistency in the spacing between each component of the train. I think the gap between the tanker and tender looks fine, it's just the distance between the tender and engine that's mostly off. So if I run him around the loop here, you can see how weird he looks with both his tender and tanker in tow. And again, the tender looks like another cargo car with that tanker, given how far away it is from James. On its own, it doesn't seem as bad from my perspective, but still, this is something I think they need to address. So, overall thoughts on James? He's okay, I guess. But yeah, his proportions in this line definitely place him lower in rank compared to the smaller engines. He's certainly not a perfect model in terms of that, but I wouldn't say he's the worst. I think the shape of the tender is fine.
James,
apart from the
get your
holes at
butt
the
out of
top,
my
it's
face.
mostly the design of his body that brings him down. Though, I guess not everything can be 100% TV accurate, and this was something to be expected of James, having already seen that one promotional image of Thomas back in December. I will, however, give them credit for at least painting the running board and buffers on this version. For his standard model, I'd probably give it a 5.5 out of 10, but with the extra detailing on this one, I'll bump it up to a 6 out of 10. Now, would I recommend buying this version of him in general? Well, yes, if he's your favorite character, or you want to have him in scale with any other 2025 engines you might have. But if you're only into the more accurate looking ones, then I'd probably skip him. If you do decide to get him though, I'd recommend getting him in this pack for the additional detail and inclusion of this white tanker. Anyway, that is my review on the new 2025 Motorized James. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys. Ramafool signing out.